I was going to try to be smug and start out with a question asking who is Tom Bombadil, because that's also a question that the hobbits asked, but that's what the book's about, so I won't do that. But the first time we ever see him, he comes out and he's singing. It's some kind of jarring the way that he arrives. He's singing, and I'm not going to attempt the tune, but hey dole, merry dole, ring dong a dillo.
Profound.
So
deep stuff.
You up to that point in the book, there's all these other characters who make a lot more sense to us. We can relate a little bit, and then this guy comes out, granted when the hobbits need him. And so why do you think Tolkien introduces him that particular way?
Well, he's quite a contrast to the situation they find themselves in. If you remember, the hobbits flee the Shire, setting out to do whatever they need to do to rid the world of the ring. They have no idea what it will entail at that point. They just want to get away from the Black Riders who are pursuing them. And the only way they think that might work is going into this ancient forest that borders the Shire. Shire is a very kind of peaceful, bucolic environment. The forest is wild and dangerous, and before you know it, they find themselves at the last place they want to be, in the presence of a wicked willow tree. And the willow tree captures two of the hobbits, Merry and Pippin, of course, swallows them, nearly kills, I think it's Frodo, by tipping him into the water and holding him underneath it with the Withywindle, with a root. And then it's Sam who helps them get out, if I remember correctly. And then when they see that their friends, Merry and Pippin, are trapped in the tree, they're obviously alarmed. And they can't get them out. So they just start running around yelling, help, help, help. And then that's when Tom shows up. And he's ridiculous in terms of appearance. He's kind of a picture of the primary colors. He's got a red face, blue jacket, and yellow boots. Kind of an interesting thing to think about. And he comes along and, in his ridiculous way, delivers them from the tree. The tree is no match for Tom. And Tom, when he shows up, he asks them, do you know who I am? And of course they don't. And he says, well, I'm Tom Bombadil. And he sings about himself. And then, but the question keeps being asked throughout the next few chapters, who is this guy? Who is this guy? And by the time you're done, you really don't know, you're like, who is that guy? Because he may be the most powerful creature in Middle-earth. So pretty, arresting kind of. And I think that juxtaposition of his apparent absurdity with that power that he possesses is a lot of fun to think about, and also kind of part of the magic of Tom. That's why we're taken with him. At least I am. Some people find him terribly annoying. I've always liked him.
So you talked about him being powerful, perhaps the most powerful person in Middle-earth. So you go into that power in the book, but he's not powerful in the way that we often think of power.
Right.
So, so in one chapter, you provide a contrast between the wizard Saruman and Gandalf. And then in chapter afterwards, you apply that same view of power that Gandalf has to Tom Bombadil. So tell us a little bit about the different views of power that you have in this book.
Yeah, there's, in the history, one of the things sort of working in all of Tolkien's writing is this vast knowledge that he has regarding the Western tradition and many of the controversies that have been, argued over, throughout the course of our history. And one of those has to do with the nature of knowledge and its relationship to power. So there's a a statement you may have heard attributed to Francis Bacon, knowledge is power, that expresses a particular approach to the world. And that particular approach is embodied, I believe, in the story of Lord of the Rings by Saruman. It's Sauron as well, but we get to see, Saruman up close. Sauron is just this distant, menacing shade. When you hear about him, everybody's scared, but you don't really get to meet him. We have a lot of material to work with Saruman. And there's this episode where Gandalf is captured by Saruman, and it's recounted by Gandalf in the Council of Elrond. So, good news, Gandalf escapes. He lives to tell the tale, but what he recounts is a conversation, among other things, is a conversation he has with Saruman. So these are both wizards. We also know that they're both, because we have knowledge of the legendarium and the origins of both Saruman and Gandalf, that they're Maiar. These are kind of like junior Valar. I mean, they were present at the creation of all things. These are like angels, kind of angel second class, you'd say. And anyways, but so Gandalf is captured by Saruman, and Saruman, as Gandalf recounts their conversation, says, I'm Saruman of many colors. He had been Saruman the White, and Gandalf notes that he could tell, when he looked at him, he was bewildered because all of these different colors would flash and sort of change hue and sort of as Saruman moved. And Gandalf just says, I like white better. And Saruman's response is, well, white's good for a start. He says, you can write on a white page, you can dye a white cloth, you can break a white light. Now, the break is the key thing, it's the clue. You can break a white light. What he's referring to, of course, is breaking light into the spectrum, right? And Gandalf's response is, well, he who breaks a thing in order to know it has departed from the path of wisdom. So what you have in that statement is a set of alternatives. You can break things to know them so that you can refashion them, remake them according to your own wishes. And that's what we see with Saruman throughout the course of Lord of the Rings. We're told that he's only interested in things insofar as they will do what he wants them to do, so he can control them. But Gandalf is implying that there's a different way to know, and there's a different outcome with this other way of knowing. And with that in mind, and this is the more traditional understanding of wisdom. The more traditional understanding of wisdom is that the world is full of given things that we receive gratefully that have come to us with their purposes already kind of baked in. And what we do is we receive these things and honor the purposes. And of course, when we're talking about other agents, other creatures that have wills and intelligence, we honor them, and we don't seek to control them. We seek to have some kind of a different kind of relationship. So that's, I think, what we see exemplified in Bombadil. I think Bombadil embodies that. So we know that in the Lord of the Rings, Saruman desperately wants the ring, and he's willing to imprison Gandalf in order to get it. And we know that if he had ever gotten a hold of Merry and Pippin, remember the orcs from Isengard, he sends and they capture the hobbits, and they're trying to bring them back to Isengard. What do you think he would have done to them if he had them in his power? Probably would have tried to break them to learn what he wanted to know. So Saruman wants the ring, and the ring of power, so that he can possess the power to make things serve his own wishes. But here we have Bombadil, and this is an episode in the story in the house of Tom Bombadil. It's a lot of fun. Tom, after a long day of storytelling, says to Frodo, "Show me the precious ring," which is kind of fun because you get the sense that he knows about Gollum. He's mocking the term precious at that moment. We don't know whether or not Frodo has talked about Gollum at all, but it turns out Tom knows a whole lot of stuff that we don't even get to see. And Frodo immediately just hands it over to him without second thought. And then Tom holds it up to his eye, and that, if you know the story, should bring to mind the Eye of Sauron. So he's mocking Sauron at this point. And then he takes the ring and puts it on his little finger. And Tolkien makes a point of saying he puts it on the little finger of his big hand. So he's got a big hand. He puts it on his little finger. And he holds it up to the candle and he's looking at it, and the hobbits realize he doesn't disappear. So Tom doesn't disappear. And he just looks at them and kind of winks. And he takes the ring and throws it in the air and makes it disappear. The ring is gone. And then Tom hands the ring back to Frodo, like an uncle at dinner, at the end of Thanksgiving. That was a little trick for you, boy. Hands him back the ring. No problem. So Tom demonstrates his power over the ring. What makes it possible for Tom to exercise that kind of power over this thing that everybody else in the story is afraid to touch? Galadriel's afraid to touch it. Gandalf's afraid to touch it. Nobody wants to mess with it because it's just.
Or they want it too much.
Well, like Boromir.
Right.
Yeah. And but the good characters who haven't been corrupted by their desire, they don't want to even touch it. They're afraid of what it would do to them. So here's Tom. Yeah, whatever. Just hands it back. So that's the power question. So, gives us something to think about, maybe even something to aspire to.
So one of the things that he does when he is, whether, we talked about the first episode where he's singing and he speaks or perhaps sings to that willow tree, and the willow tree lets go of Merry and Pippin. And then later he's singing in his home, and after they leave and they're captured by a Barrow-wight, the hobbits leave and are captured by the Barrow-wight, Tom comes again, and his musical voice is a weapon. So what is the correlation between music, between songs, and warfare, or engaging, fighting faithfully? Well, we never see Tom engaging in hand-to-hand combat, but he defeats dark powers nonetheless.
Yeah, with a song.
So talk about what is behind that.
Yeah, you can go kind of 2 layers back. So one layer is the Silmarillion and how the Silmarillion begins. That's kind of the stories from the first age of Middle-earth. And it begins with the creation story. And in that creation story, you've got the Valar, who are the offspring of Iluvatar's thought. And he teaches them to sing. And there's a grand chorus that is, beyond our ability to imagine. But within that grand chorus, there's, different themes that run through it. And one of the characters, or one of the Valar, the most powerful Valar, is a creature named Melkor. And he rebels, introduces dissonance into the song, and leads some of the other Valar along with him in his sort of competing song, which is not really a song, it's just sort of an anti-song. It's nothing. It's just chaos. So after this chorus is completed, and Melkor, in the course of the chorus, has his dissonance actually worked into the overall structure of the music, and he's defeated in that way. Iluvatar says, "Behold your music," and he reveals to them a vision of Arda. They've created the universe through their music. So everything in Middle-earth is a kind of manifestation or instantiation or enfleshment of the song, the original song. Now this is actually an idea that's not original to Tolkien, believe it or not. It goes back to Pythagoras. Pythagoras noted that there's a correspondence between mathematics and music. And this was the basis for the belief that we live in a grand sort of musical structure, the music of the spheres. So the spheres are these translucent globes which surround us. In antiquity and in the Middle Ages, this is how things were believed to work. And it was just based on simple observation. You look up and you see the movement of these things in the sky. It was believed that the planets were like features on these globes that were concentric, and they nested in each other and moved at different rates of speed, and they could calculate the speed of the spheres, and the movements of the spheres corresponded to a kind of a musical note. So that was the idea. You couldn't actually hear the music with your ear, our ears, but if you had the correct, if you had the sense to perceive it, you would hear the music. But this is an idea that is behind the understanding of the workings of creation for thousands of years in the West. And Tolkien knows this. You see it also sort of reflected in the creation of Narnia with Aslan and the song that Aslan sings that brings Narnia into being. It's the magician's nephew, I think. Mm-hmm. So both of those guys knew that stuff. And so these are just a couple of ways in which their knowledge of the Western tradition work out in their stories. But getting back to Tom and his music, there's nothing, there's no place where Tolkien says this is what's going on, but it's evident by the kind of the results that we see Tom singing things back into order, returning things to the way the workings that they were intended to be expressed or exist. For example, trees don't eat hobbits. It's an unnatural thing. And maybe after the bodies of hobbits have decayed and become dirt, then it's okay. But before that, these are living creatures with wills of their own, and they shouldn't be eaten. And that's what Tom does. He says, what are you doing? Go back, eat earth, drink water, go to sleep. Essentially, be a tree. And so anyway, I think that's what's going on with the music with Tom. He has the power to set things right.
So, does anyone? I mean, I have plenty of things to ask, but also I want to open this up to you all as well. Daniel, go ahead.
I didn't even have to raise my hand. I had two questions. One is, in all of Tolkien's work, there is nothing like Tom Bombadil, even remotely, in my opinion, like in the Silmarillion. There's all kinds of interesting, complex characters and noble characters, but there's nothing. It seems really strange. Did you in research have any idea if there was a person that he studied or a person he knew or anything that?
Well, according to the what he says about Tom, Tom existed before The Hobbit was even written. Tolkien wrote a poem called The Adventures of Tom Bombadil back in 1934, I think it was, and it was published in the Oxford magazine. So that means that Tom is older than The Hobbit by about 3 years, I guess, 3 or 4 years. So in a way, when Tom says, I'm the oldest creature in Middle-earth, he kind of is in a literal way. He was the first thing that Tolkien made up. And according to the story, his son Michael had a little figure that was dressed just like Tom. And it was his brother, I can't remember which one, played a trick on him and tried to flush it down the toilet. And so anyway, that was kind of the beginning of it. It's a Dutch doll. And Tolkien, I guess to console Michael, made some stories up about him. But what's going on with Tom in that poem is really fascinating. So if you do any work in folklore, fairy tales, there are lots of things going on even in that poem that are really interesting and correspond to old sort of stories in Europe. And now, in terms of the point you just made, yeah, you can go through all the legendarium, read everything. You'll never come up. You'll never meet Tom. But he's been around from the beginning. He tells the hobbits that he's so old that he can remember the first raindrop, the first acorn. And he remembers when the Dark Lord entered the world, and he's not talking about Sauron, he's talking about Sauron's old boss, Melkor, that far back. Which also is kind of, I think, a clue that maybe Tom had heard the music itself, knew it. The speculation that people engage in with regard to, well, where does he fit? Some people suggest that maybe he's even a Luvatar. Or maybe, Tolkien has written himself into the story, kind of like Alfred Hitchcock or something. If you've ever seen the old Hitchcock films, he always makes his cameo appearance. But I don't think those things are likely. And when it comes to Luvatar, Tolkien said, because somebody suggested, they said, no, it's not him. Other people suggest that maybe he's a Maiar, one of the Maya, and that I always get the plural and the singular. It's Maya is singular, Maiar is plural. So one of Maiar, and the idea is that maybe he's one gone rogue, but that seems to me to be kind of fits, but Tolkien never tells us that. So he's a mystery. Tolkien does say in a letter that Tom serves a purpose. He wouldn't have left him in if he didn't, but he's an enigma on purpose. So it has a purpose, but he's enigmatic on purpose. It says that in a letter.
Is there any significance to him being in the Old Forest and not wandering around doing other things?
Well, the Old Forest is like one of the oldest parts of Middle-earth. It has a history that goes back, I think, as far as the First Age. So like Fangorn and the Old Forest are some of the oldest places. So I think that does mean something. But it's a pretty, Tom talks about how the trees are in the forest kind of bitter and wise, but in a kind of nasty way. And I think that's something to think about too. And here's Tom and his wife Goldberry, who live right on the edge of it, between the Old Forest and the Barrow Downs, where the graves of the old kings are. I think there's something to that. There's something significant about that.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Can you talk about his Goldberry and kind of how they contrast each other?
Yeah, I wrote a chapter about Goldberry. She was an interesting character to reflect on. She's apparently a beautiful woman, but I think we know she's not really. She's something more or different. She strikes me as kind of a water fae. She's connected to the Withywindle. She's referred to as the river woman's daughter. And Tom refers to her as young Goldberry. She's probably thousands of years old, but compared to Tom, she's just a spring chick, But in my research, I came across something in a book, an encyclopedia of fairy stories by a woman named Carol Rose. Really great resource. And I came across something in Finnish folklore that seems to correspond to Goldberry. She's referred to as the river devil's daughter. She has long golden hair, beautiful woman, in appearance like Goldberry. And if you can catch her, you can make her your wife. And what do you know, in the Adventures of Tom Bombadil, that's exactly what Tom does. He catches Goldberry at the very end, and they get married. So, kind of fun. It's kind of now. Water fae in Europe are very ambiguous and kind of dangerous creatures. So, like Jenny Greenteeth is Usually they're female, and usually you don't want to get too close to them or they could kill you. So like Jenny Greenteeth was believed to inhabit small ponds in the north, I think it was the northwest of England. And if a child got too close to the pond, she would come up, catch the child in her teeth, and take the child down with her, drown the child. So that's the kind of thing you got with all of these water fae. But we don't see that with Goldberry. She's different. There's something really very taking about her, striking about her. And we're told that she has a washing day, and it's when it rains. So there's this day of just rain, and Tom says, well, you're not going anywhere today, it's Goldberry's washing day. So she's now this is another thing that's interesting about water fae. There were water fae who were washerwomen, and usually if you saw a washerwoman fae, it was bad sign. It meant that somebody was going to die. So say it's her washing day, it's kind of like, ooh, that kind of thing. But I have a friend, her name is Rachel Fulton Brown. She teaches history at the University of Chicago. We were talking about this, and she believes that day in Tom's house when it's raining is kind of like the baptism, sort of like the sense in which the hobbits are being introduced to this big story of Middle Earth, and it's kind of their initiation into it, which I thought was an interesting take, and I talked a little bit about her thoughts on that. But I won't give everything away about my thoughts on Goldberry, because then you won't read the book.
Something that I would maybe just throw in, which this is not giving away anything from the book, but one of the beautiful things in the Lord of the Rings is in the chapters on the chapter in the House of Tom Bombadil is the interweaving of Tom and Goldberry. You have the most powerful creature potentially in Middle Earth married, and he helps set the table.
Right. He's
helping set his table when he could do any number of things, but he and his wife are working together. The lesson for marriage in reading about those two is amazing.
Yeah, and Goldberry is this graceful, beautiful, apparently a woman. Tom is apparently a man. We're told that seems like a man, seems like a woman. The word "seem" just comes up all the time in those 3 chapters. But Tom kind of capers, kind of is a comic figure. So you have this sort of comic figure who is this remarkably powerful being, and you have this beautiful, graceful, and they kind of, as they're interacting with each other, there's a kind of harmony in their movements, and you're right. There's a beautiful kind of interweaving between them.
Which is what marriage should look like,
right,
when we're walking as we should. Other questions? Well, the only other thing I will ask about, and then we can go ahead and get to the book signing, is he's also full, you mentioned he's full of stories.
right,
And a lot of us don't like rainy days, but if you were those hobbits and you knew what you were about to go into, that rainy day would have been one of the most welcome ever. So, what role do stories have if this is their initiation into the lore of Middle Earth? What can we as parents, as grandparents, what can we learn about the importance of stories for ourselves, for our children? What does it say to us? So apply that.
Yeah, you could say that Tom and Goldberry take on the roles of a mother and father, with the hobbits as they're about to go out to the big world. And they do the things that are helpful to them in terms of providing rest and so forth. But the stories, I think, are the things that help them to understand where they fit into the big scheme of things. There are a couple points in the story where, to kind of boost their own spirits, they remind themselves that they're in a big story, a story that's been going on from the beginning of the world. And I don't know if you remember this, but they're in Mordor, and Sam says to Frodo, that they're participating in this story, they're part of it, and it kind of captures their imaginations, but encourages them as well. And then in a sort of joking way, Sam says, someday maybe they're going to talk about Frodo and the Ring, and Frodo is kind of embarrassed, like that kind of thing. And what do you know? At the very end, after they've after the ring's been deposited in Mount Doom and they're recovering, there's a minstrel who comes and sings about nine-fingered Frodo in the Ring of Power, and they realized that their dream had come true, that they were in the story and they had come out on the other side after all of the harrowing adventures that they had passed through. So I think when we tell stories, we're not just helping people or children learn about the past, but we're kind of helping them understand who they are in the present in terms of this, where they fit into the big story.